Fathers hold a pivotal place in the family dynamic. Unfortunately, many people are forced to grow up without their fathers, or worse, grow up with fathers who'd literally rather be anywhere else. In years past, it was basically seen as a father's job to be stern, come off as uncaring, and basically just be a downright jerk. After all, how dare a man be seen with a smile on his face while playing with his kids? It's just unmanly. Thankfully, the world has changed a lot in the past few decades, and we all know just how much kids need their dads, sometimes even more so than their mothers. But when Kailee McMullen's dad, Ronald, called 911 to report that his daughter had harmed herself, everyone was perplexed and worried. Think about it. A father just witnessed the unimaginable. It must have been so heartbreaking and devastating. But as Kailee's death was investigated, more and more details came out that just weren't adding up. The awful case of Kailee McMullen is so tragic, awful, and confusing, but it'll also leave you plagued with the most uncomfortable feelings of betrayal. Welcome to True Crime Stories. I'm your host and fellow armchair detective, Ty Knotts, and I post new true crime documentaries every single week. So if that's your kind of thing, and let's be honest, if you're watching this video, it probably is, then hit that subscribe button. It's free and just keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. Kailee Jo McMullen was born on December 20th, 1994, to Ronald, or Ronnie, and Karen McMullen in Norman, Oklahoma. She was born and raised there, and this is also where the rest of this case takes place. Kailee was a sweet and outgoing girl who loved cheerleading. At the age of 8, she joined the Oklahoma Twisters All-Star cheerleading team. This was the moment that Kailee realized she had a natural talent for cheerleading, and she loved it, so much so that she cheered all throughout high school. She attended Norman North High School, and during her time as a cheerleader, Kailee traveled all over the country, participating in several cheer competitions, including Cheerleading Worlds in Orlando, Florida. With so much experience under her belt, she was a varsity co-captain, and she led her team to win the 2013 and 2012 6A state title. According to her cheer team members, Kailee was a bright and very cooperative team leader. She stepped up to give her best, but she was also very down to earth, and she always looked out for other girls on her team. Fast forward to 2013. Kailee graduated high school and enrolled in Bible college in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But after college, Kailee returned to her hometown because she had other plans. See, Kailee had a very helpful and healing personality. She wanted to help save lives, so after graduating college, she got her EMT certification in Norman. At the time of the case, Kailee was working at CSL Plasma and as an EMT with Norman Regional EMS Stat. Kailee loved this job. It was what she wanted to do all of her life, and it's safe to say that it was her dream job. By all accounts, Kailee was a loyal and trustworthy person. She was a great daughter and a friend, and no one who knew her had a single bad thing to say about her. But the thing is, even the most lovable people can become victims of tragedy. And unfortunately for Kailee, she was about to learn this firsthand. At the time of this case, Kailee had moved out of her family home, but she was still living in Norman. She had a habit of visiting her family frequently, even staying a couple of nights. Kailee and her family were super close, so this sort of thing had kind of become the norm from time to time. Kailee had also been in a couple of relationships, but at that time in June, she was single, but had gone out on a date with a man. On June 28th, Kailee got dressed up, and she and her date went out for the evening. Everything had seemingly gone well, and Kailee returned to her parents' home at Abe Martin Drive in the late hours of the night. But this is when everything changed. See, in the early hours of the morning, before 6 a.m., Kailee's dad, Ronald, made a 911 call. In the call, a disturbed Ronald told the dispatcher that his daughter, Kailee, was not breathing, and that's because she had turned a weapon on herself. When he was instructed to perform CPR on Kailee, Ronald stressed rather flatly that Kailee had passed and she was not breathing and CPR would have been useless. But at the end of the call, Ronald told the 911 dispatcher that his wife, Karen, was administering CPR anyway. Immediately after the call, officers drove to the McMullen house, and inside, they were horrified by what they discovered. On the living room floor lay a now lifeless Kailee with a serious wound to her face. The living room was like a scene from a nightmare, and officers noticed red stains on Ronald's shirt, and he was naturally very emotional. Karen was on the ground trying to revive her daughter with tears in her eyes, but sadly it was too late. 22-year-old Kailee McMullen was now gone, and the investigators were left confused and with a lot of questions. Kaylee's body was immediately taken in for an autopsy, and this was where the police started to notice something weird. Ronald, whose shirt was covered in what was certainly Kaylee's blood, was trying to wash it off. The investigators constantly tried to make him stop, but he wouldn't, and at one point he had to be physically restrained to prevent him from removing any more blood off of his shirt. But the thing is, people can grieve in unusual ways, so at the time this wasn't too terribly alarming. But a weird thing that the detectives questioned was just how so much blood had gotten on Ronald in the first place. It's possible this had happened when he tried to save Kailee after initially discovering her, but the quantity just seemed insane. When the investigators asked Ronald about this, Ronald said that he'd gone to the bathroom after greeting Kailee when she got home. When he came out, that was when he found Kailee fiddling with one of the firearms and asked him whether it was loaded or not. Ronald immediately leaped forward to take the weapon away from her, and that was when it went off and struck Kailee, instantly and tragically ending her life. Now, at this point, it was never really explained why Kailee would have had this weapon in the first place, but that was largely irrelevant at this point in the investigation. The police had to start somewhere, so they decided to check Kaylee's phone for any clues, and in the meantime, they also contacted Kaylee's date. The investigators thought that maybe something had gone wrong on the date that prompted Kailee to consider ending her own life, but after talking to the man that Kailee went out with, the detectives found out that everything had gone well. They talked, they had a bite to eat, and then they went home. The investigators were back to square one, and they were waiting on the autopsy results as well as Kaylee's phone and text records. When the autopsy results came back, well, they were very strange. Based on the injury and the marks on Kaylee's face, ballistic analysis showed that the round was fired from about 18 inches away. Now, this was immediately weird for the police to hear. See, if Kailee had done this to herself, and the story that Ronald shared was accurate, then the weapon should have been more like 12 to 14 inches from her face. Now, this may sound like a fairly small difference, negligible even, but even a single inch of difference can completely change the outcome of a case. The thing is, based on the scene of the crime, combined with this newfound information, Kailee could not have inflicted this wound upon herself. Now, there was gunpowder residue on Kaylee's fingers, but it wasn't nearly enough to confirm that Kailee had fired the weapon. In fact, the amount of residue that was found on her hands, combined with the distance of the round, it meant that rather than attempting to harm herself with the weapon, Kailee was likely trying to fight it off. By this point, all eyes were on one person, Kaylee's father. You might have heard about significant others, siblings, or even strangers committing murder. But a father behind his own daughter's death? That's just unbelievable. But the investigators were convinced that if anyone had a hand in Kaylee's demise, it was her father, Ronald. But how did they come to this conclusion? Well, it was because of Ronald's actions and everything else that followed after Kaylee's attack. First of all, Ronald tried to wash the blood off of his shirt to throw the police off. Even though the officers managed to restrain him and even took pictures of the stained shirt as evidence, what Ronald went on to do after the fact was even more bizarre. According to the officers at the crime scene, Ronald went outside, dug a hole in the ground, and covered himself in dirt. Afterward, Ronald refused to take a polygraph test, which only added to the police's suspicion. And if that wasn't enough, Ronald's as well as Kaylee's phone contents were checked, and they found some pretty suspicious activity. First, at the time of Kaylee's death, Ronald didn't immediately call the police. He actually called his wife and Kaylee's mom, Karen, at around 5:38 a.m. Now, this was weird for all the obvious reasons. It was alleged that Ronald called Karen to come over right away, which was why she was at the scene trying to give Kaylee CPR. But when the detectives checked messages between Ronald and Kaylee, their blood ran cold. The investigators discovered that Ronald was full-on obsessed with his daughter, but not in an overbearing parent kind of way. It seemed much worse. From the tone of Kailee's texts, it seemed as though she was afraid of and maybe even creeped out by Ronald. Kailee's texts read, quote, "Daddy, you made me very uncomfortable the other night when we were drinking. I don't live with you and I don't have to tell you everything I go and do. You're wearing me out with stalking and nosiness." Keep in mind that the last 2 texts were sent by Kailee on June 1st, just weeks before the tragic attack. If this weren't bad enough, there were also some messages that suggested that Ronald was also attempting to take advantage of his daughter, though he claimed to have no memory of it. But that always seems to be the case in situations like this, doesn't it? The police were as baffled as they were disgusted when they found out about this. But Ronald's texts were far more infuriating. Ronald responded by saying, "I don't remember anything except your mom getting mad and pointing a weapon at me." The audacity Ronald has to deny what he was doing to his daughter, that's just beyond me. But also, when Kailee confronted Ronald via text on June 1st, asking him to stop being so nosy, he ignored everything she said and just said that he was a fact finder. What does that even mean? Also, when the investigators checked the most recent texts between Ronald and Kailee, they were horrified to learn that he had threatened Kailee to come home on time after her date. Otherwise, he would, quote, track her down. But keep in mind, Kailee was 22. She wasn't a child with a curfew, and she didn't even live with this guy. You can't tell me that this is an overprotective father speaking. This text sounds more like that from a jealous boyfriend than anything else. Moreover, even though Kailee wasn't living with her family anymore, Ronald had been keeping tabs on her by tracking her phone without her knowing, which is just so scary and bizarre. I can't even wrap my head around what Kailee must have been going through. And at this point, the detectives knew that Ronald was hiding something. So on July 5th, he was arrested on the charge of first-degree murder, and he was held in jail without bond. Ronald's trial was held in 2018, and the prosecution had their star witnesses, including Kailee's friends and her ex-boyfriend, Paul Sargent. What they had to say, though, left everyone stunned. According to one of Kailee's childhood friends, Sonia Hester, Kailee had confided in her about Ronald being physically abusive towards her during a particularly heated argument. According to Sonia, at some point during the fight, Kailee's mom, Karen, intervened and armed herself. Sonia testified that Karen threatened Ronald that if he ever touched Kailee again, then he would regret it. The second witness testimony was from Paul, Kailee's on and off again ex-boyfriend. The two were broken up, but they remained on good terms and would frequently communicate with each other. According to Paul, Kailee called him on April 6th of 2017, and from the tone of her voice, Paul knew something was wrong. Paul corroborated the occurrence of the fight Sonia was talking about, and even about the time when Karen threatened Ronald. He explained that after the fight, Kailee and her mother started sleeping in the same room. At first, everything was peaceful, but shortly after, Ronald came in, and that's when things got, well, I don't think I have to say it, and the YouTube police probably wouldn't let me say it even if I wanted to. But another witness, Megan Swan, who was not only Kailee's friend but also her cheer partner, took the stand as well and testified that Ronald and Kailee had a very close relationship, kind of like friends. Megan remembered that Ronald would drink a bit and would often push Kailee to drink too. At that time, Kailee would have been in high school, and she was obviously under the legal drinking age, but it didn't seem that Ronald cared. If anything, he urged Kailee to drink, which is just unbelievable. Megan was also one of the first friends who got to know about the abuse Kailee was suffering from. The next witness on the stand was none other than Kailee's mom, Karen. But her testimony will leave you confused and somewhat angry. Karen denied the abuse allegations against her husband, and even denied threatening him. Kailee's friends testified in court that Karen defended her daughter, which is admirable, but now Karen was the one denying it. But why? It doesn't even make any sense. Was she afraid of retaliation, or maybe being punished for the threats she'd made? I don't know, but this testimony just threw me for a loop. If Karen did defend her daughter, then that was what any mother should have done. But why was she now suddenly denying everything, after a handful of people were already testifying otherwise? It's all just so confusing and unnecessarily complex. Anyway, when a prosecutor asked Karen if she would have remained married to Ronald if she knew that he killed her daughter, Karen emotionally replied in the negative. In Karen's defense, the night Kailee was attacked was a bit of a blur for her. She doesn't remember much and everything was just hazy. She only remembers that her daughter was found on the floor, lifeless and cold. Lastly, a police officer also testified, saying that he heard Ronald say something eerie right as the officers were stepping out of the door on June 29th. According to the officer, Ronald, who was covered in dirt and blood, turned to his wife Karen and said, quote, "I did that." Anyway, according to the prosecution, this was what they believed happened. After Kailee received that very unnerving text from Ronald about coming home on time, she made her way to her family home. And that was where Ronald confronted her, and in anger over disobeying him, he attacked her with a firearm, tragically ending her life, and then he called Karen to confess what he did. After that call, that was when he called the police. In hindsight, the 911 call seemed so eerie, especially when he seemed stressed that Kailee was gone and not breathing. That was all his doing. The defense, on the other hand, stuck to the original story of Kailee mishandling the firearm and that all of it was a tragic freak accident. Infuriatingly, the defense even went on to say that there was no proof of Ronald making advances towards Kailee, so all of the claims must have been fabricated by Kailee herself for attention. Again, this is just the defense team's claim, and I'm not suggesting this is the truth whatsoever. These claims were baseless on so many levels. People can beg for attention in many ways, but this is something very serious. Kailee wouldn't make accusations like these if there wasn't any truth in them. Well, the prosecution shut down that claim pretty quickly when they presented an affidavit. It dated back to April of 2009, and it stated that Ronald was accused of taking advantage of Kailee, who was only 14 years old at that time, although no charges were pressed. So this added another very frightening layer to this case. Kailee was being abused by her father for years, not months. It proves that Ronald isn't just a disgusting excuse of a person, but he's also a master manipulator, and he knows how to keep Kailee quiet and not let her press charges. It leads you to believe that what Karen said on the stand about denying the abuse was something she did in fear of Ronald. Keep in mind that this is all an assumption, as we'll never know why Karen denied the abuse claims. But this trial was nearly over. Ronald's trial lasted about 2 weeks, and on December 4th, 2019, Ronald Lee McMullen was found guilty of the first-degree murder of his 22-year-old daughter, Kailee, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict, Karen broke down in tears and sobbed uncontrollably. Ronald's face was stone cold and emotionless throughout the trial and the sentencing, which was so unnerving, and it shows what kind of a monster he truly is. Kailee was a young and ambitious woman who had so much to look forward to. Having worked in emergency services herself, Kailee was a very compassionate and patient person. But Kailee could have never imagined that one day she'd find herself on the receiving end of the very EMT services that she provided. The reason behind her death was her father, who had a very sick and depraved fascination with her. After Kailee's death, Karen unfortunately now suffers from PTSD. Being a nurse, she must have been used to seeing patients of all kinds, but seeing her daughter like that in their own home is a memory that has been viciously engraved into her mind. It's unclear whether Karen was a victim of Ronald's too, but knowing Ronald, I wouldn't put it above him to control everyone he had power over. Ronald's disgusting actions led to irreversible outcomes, and not only did they lead to his daughter losing her life at his hands, but he also completely destroyed the McMullen family. Whether he was losing control over Kailee or he didn't want anyone to find out what he was doing to her behind closed doors, we don't know the reason behind his heinous actions. But what we do know is that Ronald is a sick, rotten, and deranged monster from the inside out, who left everyone scarred. He doesn't deserve to ever see the light of day again, and he won't. We can only hope that Kailee's family and friends can move on from this tragic loss, because Kailee could have accomplished so much in her life, but her life was cut short by the very person who helped give her life in the first place. This case is so disturbing and uncomfortable. To think that a father can commit murder is bad enough, but the disgusting reason behind it just makes your skin crawl. It's something you don't want to wish even on your greatest enemy. Fathers are protectors. They're supposed to be kind. They guide their children and nurture their young minds to become better. Kids look up to their parents, especially their fathers. It can sometimes become natural to be somewhat of an overbearing parent, but Ronald took that to a completely different place. To all the fathers watching, the best thing you can possibly do is set a good example for your children and make them proud. You're their hero whether you want to believe it or not. Don't force them to take that title away from you. Thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of True Crime Stories. I wanted to give a special thank you to a couple channel members, including Susan Q and Sarah Anderson. If you also want to become a member of the channel, you gain access to new videos sometimes days or weeks before they're uploaded to the public, and it's currently the best way you can help support the channel. I really appreciate all of you that have decided to do that. And if you want to join, you can click that big join button below the video, or find the link down in the description. But as always, if you enjoyed this video, check out this other interesting case I covered, and don't forget to subscribe. It's completely free and just keeps you up to date with all of my future videos. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.